And let's try and analyze Donald Trump's new presidency. And I'm going to go straight to Clayton Allen, who is from the Eurasia Group. He's joining us. Mr. Allen, thank you so much. Donald Trump's second term will mark another turn in US policy towards an interest-based transactional approach. That's what most watchers have to say. How will it really impact the geopolitical issues of the day?
Well, first, thank you for having me. And I think you're absolutely right. The basic thrust is that Trump's going to take a very transactional approach to the way the U.S. interacts with the world. The key impacts from this will be a reduced U.S. role in the transatlantic security alliance. The U.S. will play less of a dominant role in NATO, specifically. The U.S. will also play less of a dominant role in assisting Ukraine. U.S. financial and military assistance to Kyiv will decrease as Trump looks for more sort of benefit from the things that the U.S. is providing. Where you can focus your attention for Trump growing relationships are where the U.S. gets something back in return. So the AUKUS defense relationship in the Indo-Pacific, as well as the expanding U.S.-Indian military alliance, are both areas that we see Trump as potentially focusing on for greater U.S. interaction.
Okay, let's try and get your views on two ongoing life conflicts. One assessment is that Donald Trump's re-election may be almost like a dream come true for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Do you think the incoming president will be a bigger champion of Tel Aviv's hawkish stance against Palestinians? And what about the Abraham Accords? Will it really see the light of the day?
So I think that Trump will not necessarily be an advocate for Israeli policy, but he'll be less of a force arguing against it. Where you saw the Biden administration willing to make public criticisms of Israel's offensive strategies in Gaza and elsewhere, and make obvious attempts to moderate Israel's plans for offensive strikes, the Trump administration will be far less interested. Trump essentially will give Israel much more of a free hand to dictate its own military strategies. I think that when you consider what that means for a long-term trajectory in the region, it means that a trilateral deal between the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Israel will continue to be somewhat delayed. There will continue to be somewhat on the back burner. A bilateral deal or some U.S.-Saudi specific relationship deepening is likely on the table. That probably will be a focus for Trump pretty quickly after taking office.
And what about the Abraham Accords? What's the future of it?
I'm sorry, the what?
Abraham Accords. He really pushed
yes, that's what
for
I'm
it
referring
during
to,
his
the
first
trilateral
tenure.
deal. But yes, that's what I'm referring to, the trilateral deal between Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States. That deal, as I said, is probably on the back burner because Trump giving Israel a much freer hand for its own offensive strategies means that it will be more difficult for Saudi Arabia and Israel to normalize their own relationship. So a continued delay in realizing the full scope of the Abraham Accords. As I mentioned, a bilateral deal between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia will be one of the things that Trump focuses on very quickly upon taking office.
And will it be continuity as far as Ukraine-Russia war is concerned?
No, we don't think it will. We think it'll be a massive shift from the current approach. Biden's approach has been dictated by giving Kyiv the political support it needs to dictate the terms of any ceasefire arrangement. Trump, on the other hand, will be focused almost exclusively on bringing that conflict to an end as rapidly as possible. We expect that he will do so without political buy-in from the Europeans, meaning that while a ceasefire of some type is increasingly likely in 2025, it will not be a durable one. It will be a temporary resolution of the conflict, leaving the frozen conflict likely to reignite at some point in the future.
Alan, what about protectionism and decreased global cooperation? Will that be the byproduct of Donald Trump emphasizing on America first?
So from a protectionist standpoint, we think that Trump will erect new tariff barriers. He's been pretty clear about that during the campaign, and he has the legal authority to do it. When you discuss protectionism in terms of domestic political investment, domestic investment in U.S. manufacturing, we think that Trump probably won't mark a massive shift from the current policy. In fact, you might see domestic investment provisions shrink a little bit, specifically the Inflation Reduction Act. But in terms of trade approach overall, yes, Trump will be protectionist. He will be erecting additional barriers between the U.S. and the rest of the global economy.
So will that also, this Trump's definition of nationalism, will it lead to increased global tensions or cooperation?
We think that this will exacerbate geopolitical tensions. It will exacerbate some of the impacts of Trump's pullback from the global stage in terms of multilateral security arrangements. But it will also open the door for bilateral negotiations that could see improvement or shifts in the U.S. relationship with individual countries. Remember, Trump's a deal maker. We think that overall, a restrictive trade approach will exacerbate geopolitical tensions, but it could open the door for negotiations in some specific instances.
You know, Alan, there are multiple readings of his victory speech. He sounded conciliatory. There was that word of being a healer as well that he had dropped in. Will that be a completely new presidency, or will he be picking up from where he left in 2020?
I wouldn't read too much into the tone of Trump's victory speech. A conciliatory approach at this point in the campaign, especially right after a mandate delivering election, is not a clear indicator of Trump having shifted as an individual. Remember, after his first assassination attempt, you saw a shift towards a more measured tone in his dealings with the media. That lasted all of 5 days. I think that a conciliatory approach in Trump's victory speech will be a similarly temporary shift in the way that he shapes his rhetoric.
Okay, and will there be some kind of bipartisan approach in the functioning of the government and the Congress?
Absolutely not. Republicans have control of both chambers. They have clear mechanisms to deliver on tax policy and other key priorities without the need for Democratic input. That renders this to be largely a partisan exercise. Bipartisanship as a driver of action in Washington has not been salient for a long time. It's not likely to return under a Trump presidency.
Okay, your final thoughts, and then we'll wrap up this conversation. Did the results come as a surprise to you as it did for everyone around the world?
Eurasia Group had expected a Trump win since early in the year. That was down to the fundamentals of the race, the anti-incumbency bias observed in races around the world, as well as President Biden's continued low polling numbers, which tainted him and his chosen successor with the sense that they were not able to deliver on the things that mattered most to voters. We were surprised by the magnitude of Trump's win, though. This, as I mentioned, was a mandate-delivering election. Trump won the popular vote. He won all 7 swing states in the U.S. That's much more cohesive, much more dominant of a victory than I think we had potentially expected. But the fact that he won was in line with our admittedly very low conviction views heading into this vote.
All right, Alan, thank you so much for speaking to NDTV and sharing your thoughts.